So with that, I invite Mustafa, the SSATP program manager, to say a few words of introduction to kick off this webinar. We have 111 participants connected. We're still expecting a few more, and hopefully they'll be trickling in as we get started. So over to you, Mustafa.
Thank you, Kauri. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So good morning, good afternoon, and happy New Year to everyone. Welcome to and thank you for joining today's webinar, our first webinar for this year. As you may know, improving the services of the informal bus sector is at the center of the Africa Transport Policy Program, 4th Development Plan. This is part and parcel of the overall objective of decarbonizing the transport sector in Africa. Last year, we've completed a broad study that looked at the challenges and the opportunities to improve the informal sector or the paratransit sector in a report titled The Informal Sector, Myths and Reality. Today we would like to discuss the process of engaging with and integrating paratransit operators as part of the project solution to improve public transport services. We are going to present and discuss experiences conducted in South Africa and in Uganda with discussants from Dakar, Kampala, and Lagos. Before moving to the presenters, let me ask Fatima to tell us a bit more about what SSATP intends to do to build the capacity of the informal bus sector under this 4th development plan we've just started there. Over to you, Fatima.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. So I'm Fatima Arroyo. I'm a senior urban transport specialist at the World Bank and the co-pillar lead of the urban mobility pillar in SSATP. So just very briefly, in few minutes, we wanted to give you a flavor of one key activity that within SSATP we are developing as part of, as what Mustafa mentioned, as part of this DP4, the Development Plan 4, that is focused in building the capacity of informal private sector operators. So what we have seen from the experience in the Africa region is that despite the dominant role of informal transport in African cities and several efforts in some cities to enhance the sector, there is still very limited structured capacity building in the domain of informal urban passenger transport. And this kind of capacity building, it is critical in the efforts of cities to professionalize the transport sector. So what is SSATP doing to cover this gap? So we are developing an SSATP capacity building program for informal private sector operators, with the idea of supporting cities that are initiating processes to support the improvement and professionalization of these informal transport operators. The idea is to include, in broader terms, an audience that include informal operators, associations, policymakers, practitioners, as a diverse group of relevant stakeholders that will be gaining skills and good understanding and a common understanding about the needs to identify, prepare and implement solutions to improve informal transport. The idea is that this training will be providing this good understanding of what are the key challenges in urban transport and in the informal transport in the African context, both in terms of challenges and opportunities, and what are the key dimensions and levers that can be put in practice in order to support and enhance the informal transport. Another key dimension of this capacity building program is learning from what other cities, either in the Africa region or elsewhere, had been put in practice in terms of professionalization and regulation of paratransit. And for us, another key dimension, as we will be having a group of diverse and relevant stakeholders, it is to gain a common understanding of the importance of all those different stakeholders and the role that each of them play in the improvements of the informal transport. The format of this training, it will be very interactive, rather than being a lecture type. We believe in the learning that is based in peer-to-peer learning and participatory problem-solving learning. For those of you that know some of the capacity building that the World Bank has developed in the past, the idea is to build on some of the experience of the LUTP, the Leaders in Urban Transport Planning, a very successful capacity building, and use a similar methodology. For us, this webinar today, it is extremely interesting to share some of the previous experience of some of the cities in building and engaging this informal transport. And we believe it's also a very important and very strategic webinar for us to help us shaping this capacity building program of informal transport operators that we are currently building. So with this, please stay tuned for updates about the program that we expect to initiate in a first phase in the coming months this year in 2023. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mustafa.
Okay, so now I would like to introduce the next section of our webinar, where we will invite Nico McLaughlin to present on the understanding the capacity needs of the paratransit industry in South Africa, in sub-Saharan African cities. Amanda, who will present on the consultative forum in Kampala, and Harry, who will present on the Cape Town BRT professionalization program. Just a few words. Nico McLaughlin is the managing director of their organization Development Africa in South Africa. He's a leading public transport and paratransit reform specialist with over 30 years of experience in Africa. Amanda was the independent chairperson for the consultative forum in Kampala. She's an Ugandan urban planner and consultant, as well as a lecturer and researcher at Makerere University. And Harry is, Dr. Harry is an academic and research consultant with the World Bank, the Volvo Research and Educational Foundations, the South African National Treasury, and other global and local organizations. So I welcome Nico for the first presentation. Let me just go ahead and pull that up. So just give me 1 second. Can you see my presentation, Nico?
Yes, we can. I can.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Just let me know when to move the slides.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kaori. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon from Cape Town. Kaori, we can move to the next slide, which states the purpose of this presentation. Thank you. All right. So my presentation in the discussion today focuses on sorry, I just need to move part of my screen so that I can see the slide. Focuses on 3 things. I'd like to provide a framework for today's discussion on paratransit capacity building. I think the common perception out there around paratransit capacity building in general is that it is about training. And we'd like to provide a context to that notion. Secondly, the purpose of my input is to illustrate how the framework that we've used in cities like Kampala and Cape Town has been applied in these cities, and perhaps to from there ask questions about the capacity building programs we're currently planning and have implemented in the past. And then I was asked to reflect on the learnings emanating from, in particular, the 7th Avenue Transport Operating Company pilot project that the City of Cape Town implemented between 2017 and 2019 as an example of a systemically designed capacity building and learning intervention. Next slide, please. All right, so always good to start with a definition. And the UNDP's definition of capacity building is that capacity refers to the ability of individuals and institutions to make and implement decisions and perform functions in an effective, efficient, and sustainable manner. And in the next slide, let us unpack this definition. What does this definition mean? So, at the individual level, capacity building refers to the process of changing attitudes and behaviors through imparting knowledge and developing skills. At the individual level, it is about skills and knowledge that results in attitudinal and behavioral change. At the institutional level, and specifically in the paratransit industry, capacity building should focus on the overall organizational performance. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides, because institutional issues in the paratransit industry, in fact, manifests at least two levels, the industry level and the operational level. So at institutional level, capacity is about functioning capabilities as well as the ability of the organization to adapt to change. And then at the systemic level, capacity should emphasize the overall policy framework in which individuals and organizations operate and interact with their external environment. So a very useful definition that sees capacity as capacity need manifesting at three different levels: the individual, the institutional, and the systemic level. Very useful to keep that in mind in our conversation this afternoon. So if we were to, at the next slide, just visually depict this definition, the picture looks like that. Systemic capacity needs manifest within that framework in which the paratransit industry interacts with its environment, and in particular, the relationship element of that environment. Think about the interaction of the paratransit industry in your city with the authorities, the regulators, the planners, the law enforcers, etc. Think about the interaction of the paratransit with its supply side and with its customer base in the form of the public transport user. So those would be the systemic level of capacity need manifestation. And in the discussion on Kampala and Cape Town, what I would like to emphasize a bit later on is how our understanding of need manifestation has resulted in intervention design when it comes to capacity building. At the institutional level, it's all about enhancing organizational performance in the paratransit industry. And as I said a moment ago, institutional capacity needs in paratransit industry normally manifests at least two levels. The industry level, whether it is at national or federal level or regional, provincial or state level or local level. It is about industry organizational capacity. And then the operational level. So the 7th Avenue case, which I'll be referring to in the conclusion of my input, is a typical operational level institutional intervention that we designed in the city of Cape Town. At the individual level, capacity is about bringing knowledge and skills as a means to positively impact attitudes and behaviors. Next slide, please. All right, so allow me to perhaps at the onset of this discussion this afternoon provide a perspective out of our experience working in about 14 or 15 sub-Saharan cities over the last 25 odd years. Provide a perspective on paratransit capacity needs and how to address them. So let's look at the systemic level, which is really that external environment in which the paratransit industry functions. Our proposal would be that your capacity interventions should focus on things like network development, advocacy, collaboration, and teaching the paratransit industry how to enter into co-production relationships with professional service providers and others in their environment. But also at the systemic level, and Amanda's input will hopefully expand on this afternoon, consultations, the opening of dialogues, initiating reforms, and very importantly, leadership development, which is not about individuals, it's more about leadership group development, and then industry unification. So you can see here, training has its place, but if your needs around industry capacity are predominantly at the systemic level, if your assessment is that that's where we need to intervene first, that package of interventions is typically what one would focus on. I think the story of Kampala over the last 2.5 years, by and large, is a story of a capacity building strategy for the paratransit industry that is predominantly focused at the systemic and secondly, the institutional level. So institutional level capacity building deals with essentially organizational performance improvement. So organizational systems and procedural restructuring and internal policy development. That normally goes hand in hand with systemic interventions or systemic capacity building interventions. Then at the individual level, it is about conventional training, and it is about the imparting of both generic and industry-specific knowledge and skills, of course, with the view to effect attitudinal change, behavioral change. And as Fatima said in her introductory remark, the kind of training interventions that we have been working on over the last years, a decade or more, in cities like Cape Town, we've learned that the paratransit industry responds very, very well to what I would call inductive learning methodologies, experiential learning methodologies, case studies, these kind of ways. And hopefully, Harry, in your discussion, you'll touch on the 3-year capacity program we ran in Cape Town between 2015 and 2017, and a lot of the way in which we approached the individual level of that intervention. The next slide, please, Corey. Thank you. All right. So before I turn the attention to the work we've done in Cape Town and in Kampala in the last couple of years at a high level, allow me to share with you a piece of research that was done in the 1960s that has informed my work over the last 25, 30 years around paratransit reform quite significantly. And that's the work of Burke Litwin. And Warner Burke and George Litwin developed a model of organizational performance improvement and organizational change. And in that model, they differentiate between what they call the transformational aspects of a change or improvement process and the transactional elements of a change or improvement process. So in their model, and this, I'll just run through this very briefly, transformational change happens in response to the external environment. And Mustafa and others, in our preparation of this webinar, we spoke a lot about cities like Dakar, Lagos, Kampala, Cape Town, etc., Johannesburg, that have seen large-scale public transport improvement initiatives. These kind of things like a BRT implementation often provide fantastic catalysts for change. So the core concept of the Burke-Litwin model of change and organizational development is that transformational change happens in response to the external environment. And these changes impact the mission, the strategy, the culture, and the leadership of these organizations. And Amanda, I think by and large, this is what we're seeing in the case of Kampala, where the paratransit industry is beginning to reorganize, reposition in response to either real or perceived changes in its environment. In turn, the transactional element of change and capacity building manifest in structure, systems, management practices, and work climate. Now, Burke-Littman basically says when your transformational and transactional factors start working together, it affects motivation and therefore performance. All of this results in a feedback loop, and the organization in their model then impacts hopefully positively on the pressures for change in its environment. The next slide, please. Okay, so next slide, thank you. All right, so I'm quickly going to turn to two case study cities, Cape Town and Kampala, from to reflect on capacity building work that we've done in these cities in recent years. Looking at the Cape Town slide, you can see that our logic has always been, what are the forces for change? How do those forces for change result in capacity need? Figuring out where that capacity need manifests at the systemic, institutional, or individual level, and then designing an intervention response or a package of intervention responses that address all of those, not just seeing, for instance, individual training as the only form of capacity development. Now, in the case of Cape Town, what's useful, you can read the slide as I speak on, but what's useful for me who've lived through the BRT implementation in Cape Town, I would say the city of Cape Town as a planning and implementing authority on large-scale public transport change have had three phases or three approaches over three different cycles around paratransit capacity building. The first phase was the period roughly 2009 to 2014, when the city was in the throes of implementing the first phase of its MyCity BRT system. The MyCity BRT system was premised on 100% paratransit replacement on the corridors where the BRT bus was going to be introduced. And a lot of the energy in that process between 2009 and 2014, which I'm sure is very much the case in Lagos, in Dakar, and other cities that's grappling with BRT implementation or have completed phases of BRT implementation, the bulk of the energy is consumed by things like corporatization, company formation, dealing with the paratransit withdrawal, the compensation negotiations in the South African industry context, and then finally things like contract negotiation and actually mobilization so that you have companies that can run these services. I call that phase, the 2009 to 2014 phase in Cape Town, the capacity on the trot phase. In other words, there was no dedicated time, resources, anything devoted to paratransit capacity building. Capacity building was something that happened during negotiations, during preparations, that kind of thing. It doesn't mean to say that we did not train drivers or upskill drivers, but capacity building was rather a kind of an integral mix of a transition process rather than a dedicated effort with dedicated resources. So at the end of 2014, when these first phase contracts were taking effect and everybody was singing the praises of the success of phase one, we took a step back and we started reflecting on the good, the bad, and the ugly of how we achieved phase one of the BRT in Cape Town. And we came to 2 or 3 big realizations. At the content level, at the design level, the first realization was 100% replacement of the BRT, of the paratransit, is simply too costly and too complex to achieve. So there was a change in thinking from the planning perspective that moved towards impact-based replacement and a much, much stronger focus on multimodality. Now, what that meant is that we needed to build the capacity of the paratransit sector to be affected in the further phases of BRT rollout. We needed to build their capacity to participate, to meaningfully integrate, etc., in a preemptive manner. We could not do it in the on-the-trot, afterthought manner that we did it in the first phase. And the other element that happened in the middle phase, 2015 to 2017, there was an understanding of the knowledge and skills deficit that public paratransit operators have. So basic things like contracting models, risk sharing, operating costs, these kind of things, managing large numbers of staff, etc. People didn't have the knowledge and the skills to do that. So what we ended up, when you look at this matrix that assesses what I call the middle phase, 2015 to 2017, it's a needs-based, highly structured, but mainly focused on institution building and individual knowledge and skills. And Harry will speak about the so-called N2 Express capacity building program. So this is the interim project between phase 1 and phase 2, which was accompanied by a 3-year, highly structured, very much needs-based individual knowledge and skills capacity program. The third and final phase is the exciting phase for me, and then we can move to the next slide. And that is where the city moved to what I call a learn by doing or learning by doing approach. That's fine, you can move to the next slide, Corey. And that was the 7th Avenue Transport Operating Company project. So the logic was, after 3 years of a huge focus on institution building and individual knowledge and skills enhancement, let us see if the paratransit industry, with a fair degree of support, can actually implement this. Remember, what the city of Cape Town was now interested in was 2 things. Where you're impacted, we need you to come and operate the BRT bus. So we still need to give you that skill. Just hold that slide for a moment. And secondly, we need those of you who are not impacted as paratransit operators to reorganize, improve, professionalize your service so that you can become contracted feeder distributing service providers to the new public transport system. Now, in a moment, I'll speak about this in a bit more detail. Suffice to say that we had a big success story with one of the pilot projects, and that was the 7th Avenue story, which in all probability, my colleagues at SSATP requires a webinar discussion in its own right, because different people have spoken about that, but people tend to sort of latch onto things that they see as important. Now, the 7th Avenue story was fascinating in the sense that we focused on a typical feeder distributor association that had some problems, but in essence, the content changes that happened there was we shifted the operation from an owner target operation to a collectivization of earnings of all revenue and costs. We shifted the operation from a fill and go system to a scheduled service operation, and thirdly, from an individual owner managed business to a collective managed business. In other words, a proper company with structures and role responsibility, allocation, etc., etc. The results we achieved at a tangible level it sort of took everybody's breath away. We reduced the fleet size by 50%, we reduced fuel consumption by 45%, and we moved all the drivers, retained all the drivers, and moved them from drivers working in a high-risk environment, 15-hour workdays, to working in a highly structured, legally compliant conditions of service down to a 7.5-hour workday. So those were the tangible results. The city asked us at the end of the period where, in fact, for 12 months, the association self-sustained this significant learn by doing intervention. And we went in and workshopped with the association the success factors. Why did this work? Now you can go to the next slide, Corey, because those 5 points.
Nico, just quickly, if you could start wrapping up, we're a bit over time.
Sure. All right. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So the association identified 5 success factors in the 7th Avenue case: the external environment, leadership, the change in core business, the redundancy of the owner target model, management practices and structures. And we can go to the next slide. And I'm not going to unpack this slide. Hopefully this will be shared, but each of these elements are unpacked in this slide. So for instance, the introduction of BRT linked with their own sense of overtrading, these became burning platforms in a change process. So when you look at the 5 factors here: external environment, the case for change internal to the organization, the role of a visionary leadership grouping, appropriate structures and management practices, these were the things that they identified as the major success factors in that change process. And the last concluding slide, what does all of this tell us about capacity building and capacity needs? Number 1, transformational forces in the external environment of the paratransit industry play a major role in defining capacity needs. An outside-in view in respect of capacity needs is therefore an essential starting point. Number 2, the inadequacy of the conventional owner-target business model is a slumbering yet potentially powerful driver of change in the industry. Exploring alternative business models is therefore a big-ticket capacity issue in the paratransit industry. And finally, the role of visionary, articulate, and accountable leadership in the industry is a sine qua non. Developing incumbent and future leaders must feature high on the capacity building agenda for paratransit in African cities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico. Now I invite Amanda to share her presentation on the consultative forum in Uganda.
Kaori, could you please enable screen sharing?
One participant, hold on, Amanda. I'm making you co-host again. There you go. You should be able to share now. You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, I was waiting for myself to be said to speak. Thank you very much, Kaori, and thank you for the invitation to share the experiences from Kampala. Thank you, Nico, for the presentation. And this is going to be just taking you through where we've come from and where we are in the process of preparing for BRT, especially focusing on the paratransit modernization and providing a platform for them to share their experiences, their expertise as the experts on the ground and delivering people within the Greater Kampala metropolitan area. So we started as an AFD-supported project. This was a recommendation, as it has been mentioned already. And from there, it was recommended that we proceed with the consultative forum, and this was taken over by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, which is a German organization. Until to date, we still have these engagements. In fact, yesterday I was receiving phone calls from the paratransit leaders that they would like to discuss with us some things that they need guidance on. So we are still going on with the forum. This we might also have come across. That's why we are working on it as a Greater Kampala Metropolitan Area project, because it crosses the boundaries of the Kampala Capital City Authority as the governance structure and goes beyond the other entities who are also part of the consultative forum. And it's a dream to see this kind of system within the Greater Kampala Metropolitan Area. And it's also a dream not only to the user, not only to government, it's a dream to the operators. And these operators are mostly the minibus taxi industries, and these came up during the discussions. So the dream to have this kind of station, BRT, within a structure, a system that is dominantly like this, with the minibus taxis, definitely it requires us to have dialogue and do capacity building and have expertise such as Nico's that can help prepare the process in a natural way, sustainable way, and acceptable to all the stakeholders. We started on a rather hot platform because they were very sensitive. The minibus taxi industry leaders were very sensitive to any discussion to do with the bus. And they looked at it as a way of taking away their source of livelihood, as there are several families depending on that. So we had to first cool them down, calm them down, and ask what they expect. We also had government in the room and asked what do they expect. The associations were not talking to each other. Government was not talking to each other properly. And we had all those people in the room. The metropolitan area entity leaders were also in the room and a bit quiet, but at least we were able to get some of these, like the time frame of the BRT. This is a typo. The time frame, when are we expecting BRT in Uganda? Because it's been talked about since 2014 and people are not seeing it coming. Those are several years already. The way forward, are we going to really have it? The unity of associations, because there were actually several protests those days before the consultative forum started engaging these people. They were always fighting in the taxi park, and somehow unity was the big problem that they had because each association wanted to have dominance of leadership. They required financial support to improve their transport business and wanted to do something new. They also don't want to keep running the small capacity vehicles. They hoped we can harmonize the transport sector, the borders, the taxis, the bus, the bicycles, the stations, the terminals, everything to be harmonized, and the parking as well. Then they also hoped that the BRT system can operate alongside their existence. In fact, even on the main corridors, they think that they can still be on that axis, not just feed the road. The operators also wanted to benchmark. They requested to go and see where this has been successfully implemented. And they wanted to see government assisting them in organizing their elections to have an umbrella organization. And I think we shall hear maybe from some representatives from government who are in this webinar. The biggest fear that they had was for change, how they will manage to live in this business with the buses present and the other employees in the taxi industry. Where will they go? How will they improve their vehicle fleet? So they just rejected the system. They were fearing the system. And also the municipalities around Kampala were hoping that there should be coordination so that they are not left out by KCCA and the Ministry of Works and Transport. And naturally, revenue was one of the aspects that they were looking at, not just the network within their areas of jurisdiction. This is just to show you what was happening. It was, everybody was equal. Government, the taxi operators, the professors, the experts like Nico. We had several sittings, and also gave them some assignments. And some of the knowledge that we got from them indicated that they are actually not as empty or as informal as we might think as experts in this sector. They have knowledge, but they required to be opened up and empowered. We gave them an exercise, for example, where do they make the most money? Is it the short trips or the long trips? And most of them were comfortable with 5-kilometer trips, and they were having high operational costs for the longer trips. So it was just opening up their knowledge. And again, Nico, the expert in that, helped us to break down the key issues that they needed to consider. How did we take the process on slowly and in an inclusive manner? We had to do what we call the climate setting, that all partners were important and they should be listened to. So the neutral platform was required. Meetings were in a neutral environment so that nobody feels dwarfed or inferior to the other. Even if you are an expert or a regulator in government, you should be able to respect the operator from downtown. Trust building, this came up many times. especially the government side, did not trust the operators because they were disunited. And they would come up with leadership and dismantle it the other day and fight. And they, amongst themselves, they also didn't trust themselves. They also didn't trust government because government had been promising things and there were different messages coming out from the different entities. So we had to do trust building. Also forging unity amongst themselves, yet they were disunited with mistrust. It was very tough. Nico remembers how hot that room was, despite the echo that we had. Consistency, we had also encouraged transparency, mutual respect, and setting out clarity on what government had been doing not right, I don't want to say wrong, and what the minibus taxi industry had to do and should stop doing. And some of the issues that came up from government side towards the MBT to stop doing was to stop being disunited, to get organized, to have leadership, and also to formalize their businesses. And from the MBT side to government, it was mostly stop working alone. We are partners for change. So that message came out clearly, and from what we have achieved, the parties were very transparent, and these are the parties we had. The 6 associations that we had when we were starting this forum, disunited. We had the Ministry of Works and Transport, Kampala Capital City Authority, Uganda Railways Corporation, Greater Kampala Metropolitan Entities. There are 5. And these are Chira, Machinde, Sabagabo, Nansana, Mukono, and Entebbe that we were having. We also had traffic police because of the aspect of enforcement which kept coming up in our meetings. And we observed together with them these 9 issues, that BRT is long overdue. All parties did not doubt that we needed it, given the fact that Kampala is growing very fast, the travel demand is getting higher, and the rate of private motorization is increasing. So that we agreed that we needed it. And it's not going to remain like this for the next 30 years. So that was good, but they still doubt that it will happen. So there's still some doubt somewhere. The other bus talks that were around, like Tondeka and others, they were also coming up and disturbing the discussions, creating a little bit of mistrust. Desired coordination from government and the MBT. So all these are some of the observations we made from the meetings, and the outcome so far. This is my 3rd last slide, if I remember very well. We have seen that the minibus taxi industry has reorganized itself into an umbrella organization. This happened naturally. We read it in the news, and we thought it had come a little bit earlier, but since they had done it themselves, we were happy that this was a good step. So they need support in formalizing it and doing it appropriately. It's called Uganda Taxi Operators Federation, and it has their leader as someone who used even to avoid the initial meetings of the consultative forum. So the leadership seems to be okay. And the other association that was fighting with that association, they are very close and taking the leadership on. However, the Owners Association is still having doubts of being in this umbrella organization. And I think Nico explained very well to us why, and it's all about this organization to be streamlined properly. Knowledge sharing, this has happened even amongst themselves. They hold meetings. And the best thing that happened, I think, to the consultative forum engagement, thanks to AFD, was the trip, the study tour that we call Magical, because it opened up the eyes of the taxi industry operators that they can still coexist in a city because they saw what was happening in Cape Town. They also learned how it can be done, and they realized that unity also has to happen. Nico has already explained that. So that tour opened up their eyes. The second thing that happened with this tour, they went with the KCCA officials, Ministry of Works officials, ate the same food, stayed in the same hotel, went for the same study tours. So they came back, both sides, as experts in transport planning, somehow. This does not mean that the government loses its regulatory role, but it means that at least they are dealing with the providers, the dominant providers who are also knowledgeable and have seen that these things are possible. The other outcome is the better MBT engagement. They arrange meetings with government easily, they give us feedback, and it seems to be more cordial now and involving. The fear for the buses has really reduced. It's not that much because they know that there is a way they can be enabled and empowered to be involved. Metropolitan entities are also opening up and sharing their knowledge. I'm aware the ministry is engaging them and KCCA as well. We brought border borders on board. This was a little bit sticky, but it was a request of the taxi industry that we are not operating this alone in the city. We have our colleagues, the border operators, but they are so chaotic. So if we organize us and not them, we shall not provide a good service. So we brought them on board, started engaging them. And right now, as we speak, about 4 days ago, they got an interim leadership for KCCA alone. So I think that's a good step that has come out of the consultative forum. The forum is trusted by everybody and still needed by all parties. All parties have said they need it. In fact, they have been asking for more meetings, which we have not been able to hold. Challenges, this is my second last slide. Suspicion among the stakeholders. This came out because initially participatory engagements were not happening. Engaging the transport operators was a bit not that good, but even them, they were really not as honest, as transparent as they should have been as partners for change. Would have heated verbal exchanges that would divert meetings, but thankfully I was able to manage these meetings. Lack of timely information sharing would send out invitations, some stakeholders don't turn up. And to be honest, government side was a bit afraid to sit in the same room with those guys at the beginning because of how they would attack and get angry and vice versa. So, but that we already solved it somehow. The question of how the public transport user has been involved in the consultative forum has been coming up and we have not yet done it. Maybe we shall get ideas from this webinar. And also the vehicle fleet owner fearing to join the umbrella organization, which we are seeing why. So the process is still going on. And thanks to FES for the willingness to continue the facilitation and Nico's input. And because he's neutral, he's not living in Kampala, he's an expert. He was even given a Ugandan name as we speak. And to the organizers of this webinar, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I kindly ask you to disconnect and I invite Harry to give his presentation. Let me just pull that up. Can you see the slides, Harry?
Yes, I can.
Perfect.
Thanks. You can make it full screen, yes. Great. Hello, everyone. It's very good to be here with you. I'm Harry Scholarkamp, researcher, consultant, currently based in France. A lot of my work still in South Africa and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And what I'll be speaking on particularly is the capacity building program in Cape Town that Nico mentioned that was part of the municipality's public transport improvement program. It started out in 2007 as a bus rapid transit project. But as Nico explained, in the second phase, it became a lot more about human capacity development, and BRT became a secondary consideration, and in fact, not the core of the project anymore. Just to the extent that a few months ago, the municipality announced that they're not actually going to continue with full-scale BRT and be much more fine-grained and sensitive to the local context, and particularly the formation of the operators in any future improvements to the transport system in the city. And Nico mentioned the transport operating companies as well, the one pilot that he mentioned, the 7th Avenue pilot. was one of these refinements to focus more on human capacity development. And in fact, also at the end of the capacity building program, the people who were part of that pilot came through this program. So I'm going to talk a bit more, give you an overview. Of course, there's a lot to say, but just to give you an overview of what went into one of the main streams of the program. Next slide, please. So the capacity building program, as we called it, had several learning streams. The first one was general management, so the management of a business in a transport context, the technical management of a public transport business, the training of technicians, for instance, in bus maintenance and in bus body repair. And also part of it, though not formally part of the capacity building program, was training of drivers to make the shift from a minibus, a 16-seater vehicle, to a larger vehicle as it was deemed appropriate. And there were three main partners, particularly in the general management and technical management stream. That's ODA, Nico's company, and he was very much involved in the development and planning of the program. The Centre for Transport Studies at the University of Cape Town. At the time, I was a researcher there and starting to do lecturing as well. And I convened from the CFTS side, and of course, the Cape Town municipality. At the time, it was a transport authority called TDA. And so I'm going to speak specifically about the general management learning stream, which I convened on behalf of the Centre for Transport Studies. Next slide, please. So in the context of that focus on the management stream, I think it's important to reiterate that this was a collaborative effort to develop this program. There was no particular expert. It was new ground that we were all treading, and we were very consultative, both between the project partners and also with the involved minibus associations in setting the intentions and identifying the participant needs. So that is the actual people who were in the program who were from the paratransit sector. And so if I could summarize, it is now a few years after the fact, and it's difficult to summarize a 3-year-long program, but perhaps one of the most important parts was to prepare, or foci was to prepare the paratransit sector in Cape Town for a future as vehicle operating companies. A second very important intention to us was to bridge the gap between paratransit operations, which are less structured. They're not unorganized, but they're less structured than what one would find in the corporate environment. So to start to introduce the vocabulary that one would find in a company, that one would find in the bus sector, and to make the participants or sensitize them to these words and how things work in general, to comportment and not only vocabulary. And then, of course, to influence the attitude of the paratransit sector towards outside actors. Often in many cities around the world, in Africa or elsewhere, there's generally a poor or an inimical relationship between paratransit operators and especially the government. And we wanted to talk about this very overtly, this attitude, and to see where there's opportunities for productive discussion, but also to make people in the paratransit sector aware that they are experts. They are academics, they're consultants. Amanda and Nico, for instance, are playing key roles here in Kampala in this work. And just to say to them, there's an outside world that one can go to ask questions. And that was very important. And we, on an ongoing basis, we realized that this became more and more important. Over the course of the program, the partner meetings and some of the participants from the sector had planning meetings and discussions, for instance, to refine the topics and the content for each module and to set these intentions for the different years. Next slide. The N2Express refers to a particular service and a particular geographical part of the city that the public transport improvement program was focusing on. And how participants were selected is that each of the 28 route associations that were in this part of the city could nominate 3 people from their management, ownership, and administrative activities to participate in the course. And in the end, in the first year, we took in around 90 students. Of course, that's far too many to have a fruitful conversation on any topic. And we split them into 4 groups. And what you see in front of you there, those are all people, except for me in the background, all people who were either owners, administrators, or managers or executives in the different route associations from the paratransit sector, from these 28 associations, and they were self-nominated. I think that's very important to note. We didn't force their hand in who could participate. It was left entirely to them. Next slide, please. So just an overview then of the management stream, of the modules, how they progressed across the 3 different years. The first year very much focused on introduction. We had 2 modules, each of which took place over 4 half-days on the campus of the University of Cape Town. I developed these modules and presented them primarily with input from my colleagues at the Centre for Transport Studies and from the municipalities' system planners, as well as from the consultant team, particularly ODA. And we looked at introducing what a formal or what a planned public transport system looked like as the first module, and then moved to bus planning and operations. What's different between a scheduled and an unscheduled service? In year 2, we had a much more intensive year, also presented on the campus of the University of Cape Town, where we covered 10 topics that we had mutually identified based on engagement with the participants, as well as in the project partners, and identified those 10 topics that you see on screen, looking at the various aspects of what we thought as a collective may be needed in the shift to transport operating companies. So each of these modules followed a similar format. They were each over 3 half-days, and there were only 25 of the original 90 participants who moved on to the second year. A further 25 of the participants went into the other streams I mentioned in the introduction. Some of the participants opted out of the program, and others were simply because of capacity limitations on the side of the presenters of the various streams. So not everybody moved on. There wasn't particularly a lot of unhappiness around this, but it's important to note that there's limited space and limited capacity also from a convening and presenting side. So as you can see, the modules, if we had more time, to talk about, they build one on the other. I'll give you an example just after this. Then just to wrap up the final year, we had 2 intensive modules, each run over 4 weeks. Split into 4 subtopics, each taking place over 3 days, 3 half-days again in 1 week. And there were 23 participants, essentially the second year group who moved into the third year for this. And as you can see, a lot more about the nuances of business rather than the kind of more concrete or technical topics of running a company in a public transport setting. About business communication, how one presents yourself, how you present your business to the world, how you communicate, what a CV is. A lot of the people in the participant group had never done a CV, so we gave them opportunity to do that. A lot of them had never worked on a computer. We rented computers for them to do all of this on. Things we assume as a matter of fact, we took into account based on the feedback we got from participants. And then, of course, the last module was on business planning, where we actually took them through the process of business planning and gave them opportunity to develop the beginnings of their own business plans with a view to those future transport companies we had identified. Next slide. So just a bit about the learning approach in each of the modules. In educational theory, this is called the constructivist approach, where you draw on what the participants already know. That's always the starting point. It's not what I, as the lecturer, or what an expert coming from the corporate environment knows, but it's actually what the participants themselves already know. Then the second step in that is to add some new or outside information that could come from me, that could come from the participants' observations, that would come from an expert. And then the third step is that participants reflect both on step 1 and 2, on what they know and what they've added, which we call the integration step in the learning process. And it really is important to take note of this. Is nobody who we invited into any of the modules, including myself and my academic colleagues, came in as an expert. It was very dialogue-based, the entire flow. And really the 3 half-day design, each day gave the opportunity to attend to one of these steps. So I'll take it in the example, the next slide, of the second module in the second year on public transport service management. This module took place over 3 days. On the first day, we posed the participants the question, what is a manager? We said, in your experience, in your own association, in your own business, what does it mean to you to be a manager. And we gave them post-it notes and paper and whiteboards, and they sat in groups. We asked them to work in groups across different associations. Also a bit about that adversarial aspect being addressed directly there, and just asked them to speak and to then at the end of the session on that first day to pin up what they had discussed. And then on the second day, we invited a scheduled bus operations manager from an actual bus company in Cape Town to explain what his job as an operation manager entails and what management means to him. And so everybody could listen in. I gave a briefing to the operations manager, and he had a glimpse of what they had gone through the previous day, also just so he knew where we were going to. Next slide. On the third day, then we posed the question, what is a good manager? As you can see, we weren't particularly high tech. We just used the Blackboard to pose those two questions, and always drawing back to their previous experiences, both in this module and in previous modules. And so we asked them to reflect on what they had written down. So the piece of paper on the left is what the group had come up with on the first day, and on the right is what the individuals had come up on the third day. And just to tell us, you know, what has changed? What do they think they would need to address going back into the field, going back into their businesses? What does it mean to actually be a good manager? And so after the third day, we actually set them the task. They had 10 days between modules to draw up an organogram in this particular module of their own business's operations and how the management role fit into this organogram, which they then presented in the next module, which was on fleet management. So where there was always a bridge, there was always a kind of a learning journey, if we could call it so, which built on their knowledge as the basis of the entire program. Next slide. I think it's important also to flag not only that we drew on the participants' knowledges, but also on their experiences. In the course of and during the end of each year's modules, we did what we called an assessment, but in fact, it was an interview with each participant individually, asking them how they found the topics, how they found the speed we worked at, how they found our learning approach, and what they had learned, and particularly what they had implemented in their own businesses. And this was then taken into account for each of the modules and for each of the years when we did the planning sessions between the partners. And just a few highlights from what participants reported to us in those various sessions across the 3 years with each of them. The first and a very important one is that they got to understand the shortcomings of their own businesses and of their own sector, not only operationally, but also thinking about human resources and human capacity. They realized they can do a lot more. And a lot of the modules, we had conversations about what they could do, so that it was not only theoretical or academic in the sense of being a university course, but that we could help them address particular challenges that they themselves faced. They also learned a lot, especially in the last year, about the importance of planning for their business's future, that a business is not a day-to-day thing. It's something with a life of its own, and that they needed to plan both for their business and also for themselves. Of course, I mentioned at the outset, the complexity and the language of the corporate environment. We had a lot of discussions, and because it was fluid, because the whole format was fluid, it was up to me essentially and my co-convener or the experts to guide the conversation and to understand this. Of course, it was inherent in the structure of the groups that we crossed association boundaries. Amanda also mentioned this in her presentation, that there are these boundaries, there are these rivalries between associations, and by working in groups, the participants realized actually there's a lot to gain from working with other people in their own sector, for instance, to draw on their new knowledge, to learn new things from one another. And then finally on this slide, just that they knew that there was a lot more to learn than what could be packed into courses. It's impossible to take somebody from the paratransit sector into a formal environment and teach them the way in. But what we did was we equipped them made them aware that they had the opportunity to ask questions, to engage with experts, that they can draw on outside knowledge to improve their own situation. It was not dependent on me as the presenter or the academic to do this, that they realized their own power, their own agency. And then finally, on the last slide, perhaps one of the most important things that they understood was the role of constructive dialogue. This is the participants who finished the course at the end, talking about business communications. The person on the right with her hands in the air, she was the expert we called in to talk about CVs and communication. And they were having just a free-flowing conversation. You could see a lot of people laughing, a lot of people enjoying it and engaging and being very curious about these questions. And I must say, from my perspective, having been part of the planning and the convening of this whole program, on the first day, that group I showed in the first picture, they really didn't want to talk to one another. They didn't want to have anything to do with me, even as the supposedly neutral academic. To this, that is perhaps one of the most important shifts we saw, and really is I think carries on to this day when we meet with these people about the lasting impression. That dialogue, a space for dialogue, is really important in this transformation processes. For instance, that the SSATP and the bank are involved in and are supporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Harry, and thank you so much to all of the speakers, Nico and Amanda. On behalf of SSATP, we're really happy that you were able to join us today. Now I would like to hand over to Simon Sadier, who is the co-lead for Urban Mobility at SSATP, who will moderate the panel discussion. Thank you. Simon, over to you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Simon Sadier, as Kaori mentioned. I'm going to start by briefly introducing our panelists today. The CEO of CETUD, unfortunately, was called by an important engagement. So he will be represented today by Mr. Ababakar Fall. Ababakar is an urban transport specialist with over 20 years of experience in public transport. He was a director at Dakar Dem Dik in charge of information systems and transport planning. In 2014, he joined CETUD, where he's currently director of operations. In his capacity, he interfaces with operators, contributes to the development of policies and strategies for urban mobility in Dakar, and works on several major projects, such as the program for the fleet renewal and professionalization of paratransit. Our second panelist is Olukemi Amure from Lamata. Kemi holds a PhD in transport geography. She has over 15 years of experience in research and in the transport industry, and she currently heads the bus services department in Lamata, Lagos, to oversee the implementation of an efficient and effective bus reform initiative at the Metropolitan Lagos scale. And our third panelist is Mr. John Mark Monica. John Mark is a programs officer at Amalgamated Transport and General Workers Union in Uganda. He's passionate about workers' issues and was instrumental in organizing the informal transport workers in Uganda, which led to a drastic growth in the union's membership from less than 5,000 members in 2012 to over 100,000 members by the end of the year 2018. He's currently the chair of the Urban Transport Steering Committee, the co-chair of the Sustainable Transport Working Group, and the chair of the Gig Economy Advisory Group of the International Transport Workers Federation. As we are already running a little late in comparison to our original schedule, I'm going to ask each of you 2 questions at a time and let you respond in about 5 to 6 minutes. I'll start with you, Ababakar, to talk a little bit about the ambitious reform and fleet renewal program that was conducted in Dakar. One of the key components of this program was the creation of economic interest groups, the Groupement d'intérêt économique in French, which aimed to organize paratransit operators into formal structures that would give them access to financing. So my first question is, can you tell us how this process contributed to building the capacity of paratransit operators at the 3 levels that were mentioned by Nico McLachlan in his presentation. So at the individual level, institutional level, and systemic level. And a follow-up question, if we have time today, what are the needs of the industry in Senegal in terms of capacity building in your view, and what is CETUD doing to address these needs? Ababakar, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Simon. Vous m'entendez bien?
Oui.
Très bien. Merci beaucoup, Simon. Je suis heureux de participer à ce webinaire. Je présente les excuses du docteur Thierno Birame qui avait bien voulu participer à ce webinaire. Malheureusement, qui n'a pas pu. Vous avez suivi l'actualité de ces derniers jours. Malheureusement, on a eu un grave accident à Dakar qui a fait plusieurs morts, qui fait que le gouvernement, tout le monde est dessus. Donc, je m'en vais attaquer tout de suite sur le sujet, sur le renouvellement du parc. Il faut dire qu'il y a un contexte assez particulier, je pense, qui est partagé un peu partout dans la plupart des villes en Afrique, avec le transport artisanal, c'est l'émiettement, c'est l'atomisation. Chaque opérateur a son véhicule, chaque opérateur développe sa propre activité, parfois même ne se connaissant pas les uns les autres. Et le seul lien, en général, c'est les syndicats qui se préoccupent beaucoup plus de faire face à l'État que de développer le business. Ce qui s'est passé, il y a une réforme en 1996 à Dakar qui a le CETUD même, l'autorité organisatrice pour laquelle nous travaillons, et le fruit de cette réforme-là, le CETUD est né en 1997. Et parmi les premiers sujets sur lesquels le CETUD s'est appesanti, c'est de dire qu'il fallait tout de suite aller vers la professionnalisation du secteur des transports. Et dans ce cadre, avec l'aide de SSATP, donc je veux dire avec l'aide de la Banque mondiale, on a développé notre premier programme de renouvellement du parc. Et le programme de renouvellement du parc, on a joué sur plusieurs leviers. La première chose à faire, c'était de résoudre le problème de l'émiettement de cette atomisation. Chaque véhicule, on avait recensé en son temps 3000 véhicules. Et 2700 opérateurs, ça veut dire presque on a moins de 2 véhicules par opérateur. Donc, on a regroupé les opérateurs en groupement d'intérêt économique, donc en GIE, on les a fédérés autour d'une association. Et l'idée globale, c'était de dire maintenant, on a des interlocuteurs fiables avec lesquels on pouvait discuter, mais il fallait le faire, il fallait garder la confiance de ces opérateurs-là. Ce qui a été mis en avant, c'est tous les aspects renforcement de capacité individuelle. Ce renforcement de capacité est aller à l'endroit de l'opérateur lui-même, le propriétaire du véhicule. Il fallait qu'il comprenne parce qu'auparavant, ces propriétaires, c'était juste des loueurs de véhicules. Ils donnaient le véhicule au chauffeur. Le chauffeur se chargeait en fin de journée de leur payer une somme. Il fallait que ces opérateurs-là soient sensibilisés. Donc, on a formé l'opérateur. Il fallait former les chauffeurs qui travaillaient et tous ceux qui intervenaient dans toute la chaîne. Ce qui a été fait. Ensuite, l'organisation de l'exploitation aussi a un peu joué parce qu'il ne s'agissait pas de les laisser comme auparavant avec la licence de transport toute destination, de se faire la concurrence sur l'ensemble des lignes. Il fallait quand même qu'on puisse les organiser dans une collaboration pour faire face à une demande de déplacement qui était là pour l'ensemble de l'agglomération à Dakar. Pour ceux qui ne le savent pas, en fait, Dakar, c'est une ville qui est passée de 400 000 habitants à 4 millions d'habitants entre 1970 et aujourd'hui. Et nous pensons qu'il va atteindre les 30 millions d'habitants à l'horizon, je m'excuse, il va atteindre les 5 millions d'habitants à l'horizon 2030. Donc, au niveau du système, cette organisation qui a été mise en place a permis quand même aujourd'hui de mettre en place un réseau de transport qui couvre l'essentiel des besoins. Même si ce n'est pas suffisant, même si on est aujourd'hui limité par le mode même parce qu'on travaille encore avec des minibus, on a mis en place un système de leasing qui a permis un peu aux opérateurs d'accéder à leurs véhicules. Donc, le moteur du renouvellement, c'était le remplacement des cars rapides et des Yagayay, mais l'objectif principal, nous, qu'on avait, c'était de professionnaliser ce secteur et c'est cette organisation qui a été mise en place. Et les retombées qu'il y a eu au niveau du système, c'est que les opérateurs sont passés d'opérateurs individuels à des groupements assez forts avec lesquels on a mis des conventions sur les lignes. Ils n'ont plus la possibilité de rouler où ils veulent. Maintenant, on a une convention par ligne et par GIE qui fait que l'opérateur ne peut plus faire ce qu'il veut. Son amplitude de travail est encadrée, ses fréquences sont encadrées, sa manière de faire le transport est encadrée. Et tout ceci, en fait, on l'encadre à travers, on agit à la fois sur l'organisation et sur l'individu. À côté de cela, en fait, nous avons travaillé sur l'accompagnement des opérateurs. On a mis en place une institution qu'on appelle MECTRANS qui a permis un peu d'aider les opérateurs dans toutes les questions liées au financement. La MECTRANS, c'est la mutuelle d'épargne et de crédit. C'est une institution qui a été créée à côté de ce que font les opérateurs. MECTRANS, aujourd'hui, accompagne les opérateurs dans la mobilisation des financements pour déjà accéder au programme de renouvellement, mais MECTRANS aussi accompagne les opérateurs dans le financement de leur exploitation. On est arrivé à une situation où un groupement ou un opérateur qui a perdu son moteur, le lendemain, il passe chez MECTRANS, il signe l'engagement et on lui commande le véhicule, on lui commande le moteur et pour permettre de continuer l'exploitation. Ça, quand même, c'est assez avancé en termes d'organisation. On a aussi, quand on s'est heurté aux problématiques de prise en charge des questions sociales pour les travailleurs, on a accompagné ces opérateurs à mettre en place une institution d'assurance vie, d'assurance maladie, pardon, qui permet aujourd'hui aux opérateurs qui travaillent dans ce système-là de pouvoir bénéficier des soins quand ils sont malades, eux, leur famille, ainsi que l'ensemble des parties prenantes en fait, pour ce renouvellement. Maintenant, on est dans une nouvelle phase dans le cadre de notre organisation, c'est qu'on a les transports de masse qui viennent d'arriver à Dakar avec le TR qui a été lancé l'année dernière et le BRT que nous pensons lancer cette année. Le CETUD tout de suite a pensé à une réorganisation du système. Réorganisation du système, nous, on a un projet de restructuration du système de transport avec lequel nous travaillons avec certains partenaires financiers. Ce projet de restructuration, en fait, a pour objectif de réorganiser tout le système de transport en hissant le niveau de l'organisation des opérateurs. Maintenant, sur le BRT et sur le TR, ce qui a été dit tout de suite, c'est que l'opérateur public d'académique et les opérateurs regroupés au sein de l'AFTU, l'AFTU c'est l'association qui regroupe l'ensemble des acteurs du transport artisanal, c'est eux qui vont bénéficier du réseau de rabattement pour le TR et sur le BRT. Et pour cela, on a identifié tout de suite qu'il y avait des besoins dans l'organisation, il y avait des besoins d'encadrement, de renforcement de capacité des opérateurs, mais cette fois-ci, c'est plus des besoins au niveau institutionnel, organisationnel qu'individuel, parce qu'on veut quand même que ces opérateurs-là changent de mode d'action, qu'on puisse aménager des dépôts et qu'ils puissent réellement se moderniser, qu'ils puissent utiliser les systèmes pour se connecter, pour être intégrés au TR et au BRT. Et à côté de cela aussi, l'État du Sénégal a décidé que ces opérateurs-là vont avoir un apport dans le capital de la société d'exploitation du BRT à hauteur de 30%. Donc, pour les besoins de renforcement de capacité, aujourd'hui, il y en a beaucoup qui ont été identifiés tout de suite. Nous avons déjà commencé à agir là-dessus. C'est des besoins de renforcement de capacité pour permettre à ces opérateurs d'être prêts à exploiter le réseau, ce que nous appelons, nous, le réseau prioritaire, qui est en réalité le réseau rabattement pour le BRT et pour le TR, pour qu'on ne puisse pas sentir cette différence pour l'usager quand il sort du TR et quand il rentre dans le minibus. Ça, c'est une chose. Maintenant, le dernier point que je voulais dire, c'est que le renforcement de capacité ne s'est pas limité à ces acteurs. Nous avons aussi fait ce que nous avons appelé le renforcement de capacité des décideurs, parce que nous nous sommes rendus compte en amont que les décideurs ne comprenaient pas forcément les enjeux qui se jouaient, ou en tout cas le modus qui a été mis en avant pour essayer de les convaincre. Parce qu'en général, il est plus facile de dire que ces gens-là ne s'adapteront jamais, il faut les remplacer. Mais avec la pédagogie, nous sommes arrivés à les convaincre qu'effectivement, ils pouvaient être des partenaires fiables avec lesquels nous pouvons travailler. C'est en résumé ce que je voulais partager, en m'excusant encore une fois. J'ai été un peu plus au dépourvu. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Ababakar, pour cet éclairage et cet exemple de Dakar. et dont on comprend bien qu'il ne s'est pas fait en un jour et que c'est vraiment un travail de longue haleine qui remonte, enfin qui a commencé donc dans les années 90. I am now going to turn to Kemi regarding Lagos, which implemented the first BRT on the African continent in 2008, a city where paratransit, DENFOs in particular, was the main form of transport. So how was the introduction of the BRT brokered with the paratransit industry in this context? And did Lamata implement a specific program aimed at securing the cooperation of the DENFO's operators? Was there a need to strengthen their capacities in this process? And then as a follow-up question, I also wanted to ask you if today Lamata had plans to further integrate paratransit services into the transport network that it manages, and what would be the place of capacity building efforts in these plans? Over to you, Kemi.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. For us in Lamata to provide a reliable public transport system in Lagos, the Bus Reform Initiative has been conceived with the aim of restructuring the existing informal operators as well as their professionalism and standardization. But before I go into what we did in 2008, let me quickly give you a rundown of what our Bus Reform Initiative is all about. The initiative dominates the bus service as a form of public transport, which is in 3 tiers. We have the BRT, which are the mass transit corridors, and we have the standard routes. With these routes, we operate high capacity and medium capacity mixed traffic, as well as what we call the first and the last mile buses. These buses are buses that operate from the interior and they connect into the main BRT corridors, the waterways, the proposed rail transport, as well as the standard route corridor. So invariably, I must say that the reform started in 2008. And what did we do? This reform conceived the introduction of the BRT as a tool for bus transport reform. And this actually gained a lot of accolade, which was extended to other BRT corridors. How did we achieve it, and how did we engage the informal transport sector? The main transport union, which is the NURTW and the RITIN, they were successfully implemented into this reform initiative. So what was the process? Stakeholders collaboration, which is very, very key. There are a series of high-level meetings with the management at the management level, where we had to engage them on a daily basis as regard the implementation of the BRT then in 2008, to the extent that we had to, during this consultative negotiation, we had to engage them, and on the study tour, we went to Bogota, we went to Ahmedabad in India, we went to Curitiba, so that we can show them what is obtainable, the best practices outside the country. And they were amazed. We were able to achieve that with them. Then along the line, they have to form a cooperative, because this cooperative, we drew from the management, the leadership of the union. We drew people from the leadership of the union to form a cooperative, which is called the first BRT cooperative then. These are the set of people that we asked them to separate the account of this first BRT cooperative so that they don't lump it with the entire account of the union. So every day we had a form of, we inaugurate what is called the BRT Implementation Committee. This is a steering committee. And on this committee, we have the bank is involved in that committee. We have Lamata on the committee. We have the union on that committee, all the stakeholders on the committee. And we meet twice in a month on this committee. So also, we were able to support in staff recruitment. We're on the recruitment board where we ensure that people that were recruited, we have a standard recruitment template for them. They must be able to speak English. They must be school start holders for their drivers, and also for their support staff. They must have a BSc, and these are some of the things we did. Then we engage what is called a monthly quarterly village meeting. So the quarterly village meeting holds every time so that we engage them. We let them know what is happening, how the operation is faring. They give us feedback. So this is some of the things that we are able to do to ensure that we engage them properly. So on the issue of is there a need to strengthen their capacity in the process? Yes, there is a need to strengthen their capacity in that process. Invariably, when the buses arrived in Lagos, there was a contract that signed with the OEM to come and maintain the buses and also train the union. You train their staff on how to maintain the buses. So it's a matter of transferring knowledge to them in order for them to know how to handle the buses at the end of the day. So we believe there's integration and transformation from the state union to the Lagos State Parks and Garages. The union now, they are called Lagos State Park and Garages. These are some of the integration that we have done with the union. Now, and what do we have today? And what's our plans for further integration of the paratransit? Apart from 2008, in 2020, we also were able to grafted also the union. They form a cooperative, which is called the Amalgamated. In 2020, we deployed the second BRT, which is on Oshodi to Abule Egba corridor. That is in 2020. And we have also the union. They form a cooperative, which is called the Amalgamated Transport Company, and they are currently operating buses on this corridor. Now, they have support staff of over 150 support staff that were engaged as bus officers, they were engaged as inspectors, as well as monitoring officers. So, and recently, in 2022, that was last year, we also have what is called, these are high capacity buses operators. They are also individuals and the union. They have high capacity, but they are not regulated by LAMATA. We have also drafted them also into our regulation, whereby we had to refurbish their buses. We have refurbished. We have our validators inside the buses. And, you know, through the use of what is called technology, now the use of carry card on the buses, these are some of the things that we have also engaged them in, be able to use so as to, you know, bring them together in operation. So what is our plan? Our plan to integrate the union, to integrate the paratransit in the future. 100% integration of informal operator in LAMATA franchising through a project. There's a project that is ongoing now, and the project will commence by the first week of this, the first quarter of 2023. It is called the Bus Industry Transition Program Implementation. In this program, we're going to pilot, it's going to be an holistic project for the entire Lagos State, but we have some corridor that is called the Quality Bus Corridor. These are the corridors that we want to design to enhance the BRT corridors, to enhance the proposed rail corridors, and also the waterways corridor. So what we will do is we'll do there are two phases. The first phase is we'll do a diagnostic identification and listing of impacted operators, all the paratransit operators that will be impacted on this corridor. Do a survey on all of them, do a diagnostic survey on them to know which operators will be impacted along all this corridor. Then also in this study, we are going to come up with a Lagos State policy framework for the bus informal transport program. We're also going to engage in a negotiation with the existing operators. What do I mean by that? That is when we will come up with what are the economic compensations and incentives for these operators. What do we do with the existing fleet scrapping program? That is where we'll come up with that. Also, we also engage them in contracting model. What is the best model for them to use and to continue to use? Then also training also is very, very key. We will come up with a training program for them. So we are implementing this for the next 3 years. So the second phase for the next 3 years, that's where we'll now be implementing this and be able to know the effect that it has on them and the feedback that it has on them. Then also another plan that we have is the procurement of first and the last mile buses. Currently, we procure about 500 buses, and we have been able to integrate the Okada Association. There's a Tricycles, Motorcycles Association and Tricycle Association in Lagos State. We've been able to bring them on board. We asked them, okay, to come and get the buses so that they will get this Okada off the road and be able to use these buses. So we are going to procure more of this so that they can come. And even the existing buses that they have, we want to refurbish the existing fleet so that they can be painted in the Lamata color. We can train their drivers. We can also install what is called the bus validators. You know, we now use the Cowry card. The Cowry card is the e-ticketing system, the technology that we use for bus revenue, for reconciliation and settlement, which is domiciled in Lamata. So passengers don't use cash on the vehicle again. So this is all the things that we've been able to do. We've been able to do with the informal sector, I mean, parastatals sector. Also, in conjunction with the Ministry of Transport, we develop a drivers database for informal operators for continuous engagement and identification, as well as the monitoring of their operation. Then there's also a need for us to strengthen our Lagos State Drivers Research Drivers Training Institute to develop a robust driving database for maximum training and retraining. We cannot overemphasize the need for training, because not just training the drivers on how to drive the vehicles, but also how do they behave while they are on wheel, how do they attend to commuters, all these, the culture, the behavior of drivers is also very important for us. So these are all the things that we are going to do with them. Then refurbishment and upgrading of the existing garages for passengers and operators' comfort. What we want to do is to look at all the garages. Now we are saying we don't want the paratransit operators to be loading on the road. So what we do is all the existing garages, refurbish them and ensure that they are more organized. They are organized in such a way that the garages are well lit, they have signages and all these things in the garages. Then most importantly, integration through the use of technology. That is actually very, very key for us. This is, we have done this in 2020 when we integrated them in the BRT corridor, as well as the first and last mile. And we also want to continue with this, whereby the situation where we will have all the buses installed with the validators, and to let them know the importance of financial modeling in transport operation. So these are basically our plans for them and how to integrate them in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kemi, for this very exhaustive response. I now want to turn to John Mark and talk about the situation in Uganda. And so in many African countries, the organization of the paratransit industry has multiple layers, and it can be difficult to understand. So when the authorities engage with operator groups, it is not always clear who they're talking to and whose interests the leadership of these groups are representing. For instance, you have sometimes owners versus drivers or workers versus the executives. So my questions to you are as follows. Firstly, in Kampala, did the work of the Paratransit Consultative Forum have an impact on the organization of the industry? And secondly, how can the internal governance structures of the industry be reformed and strengthened to lead and to sort of support the transformation of the profession? Over to you, Jean-Marc.
Thank you very much, Simon, and glad to be here, and Happy New Year, everybody. Maybe before I get to your two questions, I want to just commend our opening comrades, Mustafa and Fatuma. Is it Fatuma or Fatina? You used a very great narrative that we have been pushing from our side of improving the paratransit, rather than what the common narrative that it is within, especially government agencies and ministries, of maybe this is a chaotic, disorganized sector that just needs to be abolished and done away with. And it is from there that you find issues that Amanda referred to, of mistrust, of misunderstanding, and even a very good government program will always be fought by the players in the industry, because they don't have the trust, because their understanding is government or whatever agency is aiming at just getting rid of them. So it's great to hear that narrative. And I think that is the kind of positive narrative that we need down at our government institutions and agencies and city planners, just like we've heard from Dhaka and from my sister Kim from Lagos. And it is from there that I'll build on what the Consultative Forum has done for us in Kampala. As you know very well, Simon, the Consultative Forum was a direct result of a study that we did, that is the GLI team that I was part of, and the Transtech team that was, I think Simon you're part of, and Nico and Amanda, supported by AFD, which aimed at really bringing some understanding of the Kampala Paratransit market structure. And one of the key output or deliverable from the Transtech team that was studying from the top, I would say, of the market structure, was to come up with key tangible outcomes or deliverables. And one of them was to build a space for consultation of stakeholders in the paratransit. And that has been one of the things that was missing. And when we saw, because personally, having been involved with especially from the worker side for long, one of the key issues there was, how can they be consulted? Who can they speak to? What are the things that they need? And I thought the Consultative Forum was a good thing. And because it was something that was within our study, one of the things that we pushed for, I personally pushed, was after the study and the report, how can this be sustained or pushed forward? So the key thing here now, which we did, was to get a partner, and the partner was Frederick Ebert Stiftung, AVS. So the Consultative Forum then was going to have a host that was neutral, but that was speaking to issues around improving the sector. And then the other key element was to get a neutral chairperson. And I want to thank my comrade sister Amanda, who was not part of the stakeholders, but from the academia, and also had been part of the study. And therefore she had some background understanding of the issues. So from the beginning, the Consultative Forum was a unique space, therefore, that could be trusted by all the stakeholders. Just like Amanda referred to, when we started, we had 6 associations. actually one of the biggest associations that was a member of the union wasn't even part of it in the beginning. And actually they were telling us, no, we don't want to be part of this because those are the wrong guys. We can't be associated with them. But because I'd been part of the process, I had to speak to them over time. And at one point they said, okay, we can only go there because you're telling us. Why? Because they trusted the union as a neutral body that was giving them credible information that would not give them or jeopardize their existence. So they accepted to sit within there in the beginning. But as time went on, and I think Amanda refers to this, actually, when they formed the new formation that is there, one of the key outputs, just I would now refer to your question of improving or impacting on the organization. From 6 divided small associations that were fighting every other day, that were having no time to sit. At the end of last year, we had all the 6 coming together to form UTOF, the Uganda Transport Operators Federation. And that is a big step for us because even from our colleagues from government, from Ministry of Transport, from Kampala City Council, one of the problems that have been pushed into us is that we have several of these associations. We don't know who to consult. We don't know how to deal with. At the height of COVID, one of the biggest problems we had of support to the informal transport workers was whom do we support? We don't have a database. There are very many. And because of that, there was no government actually could support them, even with the small support there. But now, at the end of the process, because there was a unique space for them to sit and speak and understand each other, they built trust and understanding. And from the operator side, from the worker side, we now have a single entity. The other element of organization is that through those discussions, they have been able to identify within themselves that these are owners and these are workers. And actually, as I speak right now, they have now pushed off the workers, want the owners to be separate and also form their own association, which is already there, but used to be part of it. So through the consultations, through that organic way, we are seeing each big understanding coming through and a very good kind of foundation being laid out of how strengthen the organ. Now, the next step is strengthening these organizations because as I speak, the organization right now of the workers is from the top because it was the leaders through who were participating in the consultative forum. Now it has raised a bigger issue with their membership. Remember, there were 6. And now the top leadership is having problems to sell the current federation to the members. And now that's the next step we're in. And that's why, as I speak, we have now had about 3 meetings with the UTOF leadership to legalize their membership into the union. And then they give the union mandate to speak to their members to embrace this new organization because the members trust the union because they know the union will always vouch for the right thing. And that is the next step of our discussion, which will be now to see how best now we get now a unified body of all the workers in the paratransit into one organization for easy organization. Then from there, then we shall also have the other arm of the organization, and that is for the owners or the owners of the vehicles. So these are the issues that have come up. Now, on the other issue of governance, now from that learning, what we're trying now to look at is we're trying now to encourage, answering your second question, to encourage the development and unification of democratic representation of this kind of organizations, of all those people in the industry who depend on the paratransit for their livelihoods. But within there, we would be very key in identifying the two components, that is the employers that will be within what we call the employers, that is the owners. And in the owners will be sensitive to large fleet owners and even the small scale owners who are owning one or two. Most times they are not listened to. We need them to be part of that employer, so-called, to be organization. Then the other side, we have the workers. This will be the crew, the drivers and the turnboys and the conductors, and also the owner drivers. But within there is a critical component, especially that is all through the studies I've seen from Nairobi, Kampala, Dhaka, Abidjan, and Accra. Within the terminal, there is a structure of, for Kampala, for example, there is what we call the stages. In West Africa, they are called stations. In Abidjan, they are called lines. There is a very powerful organization of individuals who are manning those stages or those stations. And actually, that's where the power is, because those are the guys who are in charge of routing. Those are the guys in charge of the monies that is running within the paratransit industry. And if we don't have allegiance to those leaders, they're the guys who can spoil the business. And that is a structure that we need to pay attention to ensure that they are really democratic in their practices, and they are linked and have a strong link to the association at the top. And actually, we're thinking that they can have membership to the association through maybe nominating a person from the state. Otherwise, without doing that, you shall always have a problem. The other one is to ensure that we have one single statewide or in the metropolitan area, democratic and accountable government agency that is responsible for planning, development, and formalization of the sector. Because as of now, for Kampala, for example, you find maybe, the associations don't know to go. They go to KCCA, they go, although of course all these agencies have their mandate, but somehow because of ages of cross-crossing, you'll find these guys are running to the Ministry of Works, they're running to the KCCA, they're running to President's Office, they're running to the Residence Commissioner. So you don't know who is in charge of what, running to police, and yet we need really a formal agency that can be known to everybody to be really key for planning, development, and regulatory processes. Then the last thing I was thinking about, or we're thinking about, is establishing a platform akin to what we have like in the consultative forum, but a permanent platform. And here I would borrow maybe from the ILO staff, tripartite consultative forum, which has the government, which has the owners, and has the workers, as one body, that as one structure that can be used for either negotiations or raising any other issues that government, workers, or employers can raise, and then resolutions and agreements can be agreed upon. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you, John Mark. It's very useful to understand that there is, under this one term, the paratransit industry, there's actually a number of players and of interests that need to be taken into account in these capacity building initiatives. I would like now to take some of the questions from the audience. You can still ask your questions either through the chat button or through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And maybe I'll start with a very generic question for all of our panelists and presenters. And I will ask, well, you can all respond by raising your hand at the bottom of the screen as well. And I'll ask you to limit your responses to 1 minute maximum. And so the first generic question is, why is BRT presented as the only solution to the problems associated with paratransit? Are there no other options and solutions to work with the paratransit industry to improve its services? Do we have any takers for that questions amongst our presenters and panelists? Okay, I see Amanda, you were the first to raise your hand, so please go ahead, and then we'll have Kemi.
Thank you, Simon. I could also ask, why is paratransit the only problem to the BRT planning process? Because we have also a network issue. We have an urban land use planning management. We also have a parking question, the private car question, the road condition. So I think that we still need to broaden that. But as for now, it's very specific because the urgency for having improved public transport is quite high. And also the need and the sensitivity of not forgetting the dominant supplier is extremely high as well.
Thank you, Amanda. Kemi, do you want to come in?
Thank you very much. I think for me, I don't think BRT is the only solution for paratransit problem. Because if you take, I will give you an example, a critical look at Lagos State. What we have been able to do, though, because BRT is a trunk corridor, we can say it enhances traffic congestion and things like that. But also we have been able to deploy the first and the last mile scheme. And I must tell you that in Lagos right now, the first and the last mile route, I mean, I can say 60% of these routes are operated by the paratransit operators in Lagos. For example, when the policy came to ban Okada and the tricycles, in fact, what we have to do is to deploy 7 to 10-seater buses that will replace these vehicles. So we've been able to have integration from them, integrating them into the scheme. Like we have an association of Okada that came on board to come on board on the scheme. So I can say that it's not just only BRT, but other, for Lagos, we have other key scheme that is also involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemi. John Mark and Nico, and then Ababakar, yeah. And then we'll try to take at least a couple other questions before closing.
Yeah, because BRT is easy and is fashionable because it's just easy to do it. And why? Because most times the planning authorities that are supposed to do this find it difficult to engage with the paratransit. And one of the things we're pushing for is that planning authorities have to improve their understanding of the paratransit industry in their cities, to understand the market structure, the business model, the employment relationships therein. And they can only do this through what we've started doing under the Global Labor Institute and International Transport Workers Federation, what we call the labor impact assessments, alongside environmental and gender social assessment, because these can then bring in some understanding around issues of, for example, how the BRT projects are going to impact on the livelihoods of the paratransit industry players. 2, how to mitigate job losses through integrating, for example, paratransit freight within the BRT feeder route system, and also maximize the labor-intensive jobs within the BRT without outsourcing, but just getting conductors, on-board crew to work within the BRT. Because one of the things we think, the long years of experience can actually substitute whatever kind of training. We just need to reskill them, and they'll be better placed to to be within there. So I think that's my take. It is easier to do it because it is just there, but the paratransit needs a little more of work, which sometimes planners don't want to engage in.
Thank you, John Mark. Let's turn to Cape Town. Nico.
I'll try to stick to the 1 minute on this question, Simon. Let me first start out by saying, in the bigger scheme of things, the introduction of BRT or any large-scale public transport improvement is merely a catalyst for change. It's not the be-all and end-all of change. I think there is a much stronger case, as you heard from various of the discussions today, for an in-situ improvement or progression of the paratransit supply model. And this really, the Kampala story, John Marcus articulated it very well with Amanda. The Kampala story is, well, if you can't get your ducks in a row and the funding, etc., for a BRT, what's the alternative? The alternative is that we enhance, develop, progress the paratransit supply model in situ. Who says the minibus taxi or the Danfo or the Dala Dala or the Mutato is the only vehicle that we should have? No, we should consider higher occupancy vehicles for longer trip distances. Why do we need a BRT company to do that? We can just progress the model. I think this is the power of processes like the paratransit consultative forum in Kampala, Uganda, where the thinking is no longer outside in, parachuted in solutions, but rather inside out, progressing solutions. So I think the redundancy of some of the inherent paratransit business models like owner targets, fill and go, etc., the more we engage the paratransit, the more reflective they become about these models which have been sacrosanct, passed on over generations. So I do think there's a strong case, Simon, to be made for in situ progression of the paratransit supply model in parallel to the big initiatives that cost a lot of money and come with a lot of effort. Final point on this. Maybe as the development finance institutions, we should also question, what are we financing? We're only financing the large-scale improvements from the outside. Why aren't we financing in situ improvement of the paratransit model? Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. And now turning to Dakar, over to you, Ababakar. You seem to be on mute. We cannot hear you. You seem to have changed device as well. All right. While you try to fix the problem, OK, on vous entend.
OK. D'accord, je disais que je partage absolument l'analyse de Nico tout à l'heure. Je vais juste illustrer par l'exemple de Dakar. Nous avons commencé notre programme en 2005. En ce moment, on ne parlait pas encore de BRT. On a utilisé le levier du renouvellement du parc pour pouvoir mobiliser les opérateurs, les mettre dans un canevas. Pour nous, c'est un processus qui peut être long. Aujourd'hui, on a un BRT à Dakar, mais son exploitant, ce n'est pas les opérateurs, ce n'est pas le paratransit. En fait, le paratransit, on les a positionnés plutôt pour faire du rabattement et on leur a promis plus tard, quand ils auront une organisation mature, de pouvoir maintenant aller vers le transport de masse. C'est cette option-là qui a été prise à Dakar. Merci.
Merci, Ababakar. On arrive au terme de notre temps imparti, mais on va encore traiter quelques-unes des questions des participants. On a une question sur le genre, sur la place des femmes dans le secteur artisanal. The question is that despite some nice pictures on some of the presentations, the reality of the paratransit sector is that women are generally not well represented in the industry. Are there some learnings, especially on how to overcome fear of change and bring more women into the sector? I see Harry's hand raised. Go ahead.
Simon, from the perspective of the program that I presented in Cape Town, a lot of it comes down to the planners, the organizers, the conveners of programs or of particular transport interventions. We, from the outset, were very firm that we wanted the best balance of participants demographically. It doesn't matter what kind of metric you use in the program, and that we wouldn't separate groups. We wouldn't be exclusive in any way. But there was a lot of hesitance to include women participants in the program because they don't have a voice necessarily in the associations. And what we did to allow the women who we had, I can't recall how many, but there was a significant number of women that we were able to accommodate, also in the selection between the different years. We also, in the presenters and the experts we got in, we made sure that they were women, that we had a balanced view, not only in the participants, but also in the people who were presenting the program and who acted as experts. So I think a lot comes down to just the planners of programs or processes to be aware that they have a role to play in selecting who participates and encouraging balanced participation.
Thank you, Harry. John Mark?
Totally agree with Harry. When we started working with the paratransit, one of our key demands was we want women. Then at first they were like, no, we don't have women. And yet we had done a mapping which indicated that actually there were women, but the women were relegated to more precarious jobs, either to just be in the offices or to be doing the rosters, and they're not given spaces to climb up. So when we discussed with the women said, no, we are able to be conductors, we are able to even drive. Some of us, we even got driving licenses, but we have not been given chance, because even those that get the chance, because of the competitive nature, they cannot meet the target. The target is set so high and women are very careful on the road. So they cannot make trips to make the target. So even they're kicked out because of that. The other thing is that the environment is so hostile for women, given women as they are. Sanitations are so poor, they can't have access. Sanitation, there's nowhere where they can, men can easily. So the issue of sanitation, the issue of working hours, and the issue of sexual harassment. The few who are conductors, the men tell us that, okay, if you insist to have a woman because they're honest, let's see if by 6 months you'll be still working, because they befriend them and impregnate them and promising to marry them, and they end up being at home. So the insistence from the authorities, from partners to get women up sends a good message to the industry players, for the workers, and then they'll get to lift the women.
Thank you, John Mark. So if it's okay with everyone, we'll continue for another 10 minutes until the 1:15. And I see Nico's hand is raised on the same question.
My apologies, I don't want to answer or respond to all the questions, but on the issue of women, I'd like to, from our practical experience on the capacity building side and also the approach to BRT implementation and the experimentation with the transport operating company, raise 2 issues. Women as owners in the paratransit industry in a relatively well-regulated environment. My experience has been that it's often women who are widowed who become owners in an association, because they inherit the operating license and the vehicles that go with the operating licenses. Those women, to use John Mark's word, find themselves as owners. I'm not talking about drivers or women as passengers or women as employees. Those owners, women as owners, find themselves in a very precarious situation, because they now, in an owner-driver relationship, need to manage these obstinate drivers who run circles around them, in simple terms. So in our experience with the 7th Avenue model and some of the current work we're doing with the World Bank under the program TTSA, Transforming Transit South Africa, is the moment that you corporatize the association, where there's a collective management of operations, collective management of drivers, Jean Marc's model of an owner employee structure, those women owners, their position of shareholders change that relationship, that dynamic. And it empowers them because they are now shareholders who don't need to deal with day-to-day driver management issues. That's the one thing I wanted to raise. The second thing about women in the industry and empowering women in the industry, Harry, we in fact had close to a 50% woman participation or female participation in your IntoExpress capacity building program. And one of the things that really touched my heart is that a while ago, 3 women were identified in the My City project as the top technicians. So we trained, amongst others, auto electricians, panel beaters, bus body repair people, and also diesel mechanics. And all 3, the top technicians, were young women that we sourced through what I would call, Simon, the extended family network of the industry. These were not people who were only drivers or rank marshals. They were the daughters of owners and drivers. And we identified them, Harry, as you may recall, and brought them into the training. Some of them already had qualifications or a high school diploma, but could not enter the job market. So, you know, there's different ways of creating pathways for streaming women into the industry and empowering them. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. And I think we'll only have time for one last question. And it's a question on the sustainability, the stability of the institutional and policy environment being a central issue. And so the question is, if the minibus sector embarks on transformation and makes the required changes to modernize and professionalize, will the authorities establish the permanent frameworks, institutional capability, and the enforcement structures to protect those who have formalized, professionalized, and invested? Is there a way to lock in the commitments from the authorities side? As we see that in a lot of cities or countries, it can be a bit touch and go. Who would like to take that question on creating an enabling environment for the professionalization? Okay, Amanda, I think you were first.
Yeah, Simon, from our experience in the consultative forum, I think we are still at that stage where government is still trying to identify and learn more about the industry and what they are doing, where they need support, where they need government involvement. I think we still need to see a very strong partnership or urgent need from government side. For instance, they have requested for the support in the demand and supply data. I saw that question asked there in the chat, that they need to do those studies and know the demand and supply data for both the borders and also the taxi industry. But we see more urgency and need from the taxi industry right now in our consultative forum compared to the government side. We see this from the engagements we hold, meetings we call, and who rushes, who asks, who writes to ask for support, technical support, and capacity building. So we still think we need to get government to be more interested and face this task ahead of us to have good public transport.
Thank you, Amanda. Nico, do you want to add to that?
Three quick points I'd like to make on what is really a very tricky and difficult question. My opening comment is, you cannot have an island of change in a sea of unchanged. Let me just get my camera on. My apologies. So my opening comment is, you cannot, from a systems improvement point of view, create a situation where you have an island of change in a sea of unchange. That is absolutely the wrong approach, and you are courting all sorts of problems. My view on this question, you can also not rely on law enforcement to keep to protect those that have embraced a change. So in my view, if we use the BRT discussion, which is an easy discussion because it seems to be so dominant in most sub-Saharan cities and have been for the last decade or more. Number one, if you're introducing a large-scale public transport improvement like a BRT system, the paratransit, in my view, has to participate at 3 levels. Number one, you've got to involve the impacted paratransit operators whose business stand to be directly impacted by the introduction of the new service. You have to give them the opportunity to become the operators of the BRT, as in the Johannesburg and Cape Town models. Bring the directly impacted operators in through a negotiated process to become the operators of the BRT. Number two, you have to involve them in a multimodal planning fashion to formally provide feeder distributed services. And that's where the Transport Operating Company experimentation in Cape Town provides us with some good learning. Number three, you have to assist the unaffected paratransit sector of the industry or section of the industry with in situ improvement. Don't leave a part of the industry unchanged, unaffected. And I think those 3 levels of change is the only way in which you can systemically protect the various parts of the industry. And the final point on this is a phased approach. Phased approaches work if people understand the end that the authorities have in mind, not the project. Don't let the project become the plan. The plan must be much bigger. The vision must be much longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. And for our last input, Kemi, and then I'll hand it over to Mustafa for the concluding words.
Okay, I think for me, just like what has been said by other speakers, I think there's a need for us to embrace a win-win situation among all stakeholders. There must be that buy-in into that vision. The transit industry must buy into the vision of the government, the vision of the state, before we can really say, okay, we want to achieve an holistic integration of this industry. And in doing that, the sector reform must be transparent, must be consistent, as well as strategic. I think that's my own view. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemi. Thanks to all our presenters and panelists for these responses to the questions from the audience. Can I now invite Mustafa, Program Manager of SSATP, to deliver the concluding words and to close this event?
Thank you so much, Simon. Thanks, everybody. This is really a very interesting webinar. Judged from the audience, we had 160 participants that stayed, most of them, despite the length of the webinar this time of the day. It's really interesting debate and intervention and presentation. It's very difficult to summarize the takeaways of these discussions. I think the way we structured the presentation is very good, because we started with Nico that gave us his framework, how to design the interventions for capacity building. And what I retain from his intervention is the importance to get these interventions at systematic level right, which is the most challenging one. And he just said it in his reply to the question, the need to have a phased approach. I think that's a good lesson to learn. And that was straight away confirmed by the experience that we had in Kampala through the establishing of the consultative forum, where at this stage, it's very critical to build trust. And I think we saw some results there through the intervention of John where one of the outcomes is to have this unified organization, a federation of these stakeholders, which is not an easy one. I think we come a long way. And I think that proves that these consultative forums are critical in launching these initiatives. And then Harry, what I retain is really the importance of taking time. It's a 3-year program. From the outset, they might think it's very challenging to engage in the training at the individual level and organization level, but you prove that it's possible to do it with a well-structured program. And then in the discussions, I really like the intervention of Ababakar, where we don't have to have a BRT to engage in reforms, in the improvement of the paratransit. And the case of Dakar is really a proof to that. It started like any other project to improve the urban transport in the city. And then it's only the BRT only came in the last, let's say, couple of years or 3 years. And the lesson from Dakar is really the carrot and the stick. I think we had many initiatives taken by the authorities through the fleet renewal program and other initiatives to engage in the capacity building of the paratransit, not necessarily BRT, but that's the thing. And that is why it's probably, and the questions came at the right time about the Kampala, is what is missing there is really this authority. We have the institute in Dakar, we have Lamata in Lagos. It's clearly coming from the discussions and the questions that there is a need to establish a counterpart government to discuss and maintain this dialogue and take it further in Kampala. And John, as well, I think you summarized it. Yes, we talk more about the improvement of the paratransit in Here to Stay. It plays a big role in improving the mobility in our cities. And that's why we're talking more about improving the system and working with the system than ignoring it. And again, in your intervention, I think there is, as a next step, which is urgent there in Kampala, is to have, perhaps through our project, is to see whether we can help Kampala establish authority, urban mobility authorities like there is in Dakar and in Lagos. Coming back to Harry's program, I can really see the need. The bank and many development partners are engaging in a big BRT project. The 3 years program plus what Nico developed initially at the preparation stage, I see really the interventions of Nico at the systematic level to come. And then at the implementation stage, this is where really we have a little bit of time to deploy these interventions at the individual level. I can see, because this is something, maybe one of the weaknesses that we have in designing our project, a BRT project, is we talk about the need to communicate, to bring the paratransit as part of the solution, but I don't think in reality we do enough on that side. And I think that it provides us a good opportunity to think the way we design our project here. So anyway, all in all, a very, very useful and interesting discussions that is giving us food for thoughts. I think Fatima, in her introduction remark, say this is just the beginning for SSATP. We intend, I think this webinar help us more or less frame the next step in designing this capacity building program for the paratransit. We're about to develop a concept note, and then we do the terms of reference. And surely this webinar is giving us a lot of inputs to that. I thank you so much for that. And I thank the participant, the discussant, and Simon and the team for all the hard work that led us to this very, very good, interesting webinar. Thank you so much.
Hello, just before the panelists and the speakers disconnect, can you please turn on your cameras so that I can take a snapshot of all of us connected here? And thank you to all of the participants that have stayed behind. We look forward to having you in your next webinars. Please join our LinkedIn community and our newsletter through our SSATP website so that you can receive more updates on upcoming webinars and new reports and the like. So speakers and panelists, please turn on your cameras. I'd like to take a snapshot of our screens. Thank you. Just hold on 1 second as I take another one and we should be good to go. 1 second. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Merci. Wonderful. Au revoir. Thank you very much for organizing this. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.